Welcome back to Historical Secrets, where we decode the greatest mysteries that history has ever left behind. Tonight, imagine a city that seems to defy every law of nature, a place where streets are rivers, boats replace vehicles, and an entire civilization is built on mud. That's right, I'm talking about Venice, the craziest masterpiece ever created by humans. This city is not just a marvel of architecture, but also a testament to human daring, creativity, and resilience. How could they build an entire floating world in the sea without being submerged for centuries? The answer will surprise you more than ever. So, before we dive into the crazy techniques that have kept Venice standing for over 1,500 years, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming historical journeys. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end, because what Venice hides beneath the water is even more fascinating than any palace on land. Although Venice today amazes people with its dreamlike beauty, its beginnings tell a story of despair transformed into a wonder. There were no blueprints, no engineers drawing the outlines of this city before it arose, only humans and mud facing each other with pure stubbornness. It was not a miracle, but an accident sustained by willpower and intellect. When the first refugees waded through waist-deep layers of mud, they had no idea that they were laying the foundations for one of humanity's greatest works. They only knew that the mainland had been burned, and the sea, though harsh, at least had no enemies. In such circumstances, Venice was not built. It was patched together, piece by piece, pile by pile, as if people were trying to construct a raft in a storm. Every wooden stake driven into the ground was not only to support a house, but also a pledge of survival. Imagine the scene. Small boats laden with timber from the distant Alps, rocking on the muddy water, arriving at a nameless strip of mud. The men, with calloused hands, hammered each wooden stake with heavy mallets, the sound echoing like the heartbeat of the future city. One stake after another, layer upon layer, creating a vertical forest under the water, an unparalleled engineering feat of that era. The remarkable thing was that they had no idea that the wood they were driving in would never rot. Air could not penetrate the deep mud, and the salt water gradually mineralized the trees, turning them into almost eternal pillars. In other words, Venice was built not on land, but on dead trees that continued to serve life. Once the wooden foundation stabilized, the Venetians placed Istrian limestone on top, a type of stone so special that even salt water had to concede defeat. From those first slabs of stone, the city began to rise, not in any order, but through deliberate chaos. Every house was built as an experiment. Will this collapse? And when it didn't, another floor was added. That is how Venice formed, a series of unexpectedly successful experiments. But what makes Venice truly astonishing is not just that it didn't sink, but that it functioned. Remember, this was a city without roads, without farmland, without resources. Everything from bricks, food, to fresh water had to be transported by boat. Every nook of Venice is a testament to enforced creativity. When there is no other choice, humans invent the impossible. The transportation routes were organized like a network of veins, moving goods and materials through narrow canals. Masons, carpenters, and boatmen had to coordinate like an orchestra, where every stroke of the oar contributed to keeping the city alive. This is the crazy engineering of Venice, turning the impossible into a daily habit. When the world built with stone, Venice built with water. When others chose high ground, Venice chose the floodplains. When Rome looked up at the sky with massive domes, Venice looked down into the water and said, "We can do it too." The Venetians did not just borrow materials and ideas from Rome, they recycled an entire civilization. Roman bricks, stone columns, and fragments of marble from abandoned cities were loaded onto boats and brought to the lagoon. In this way, Rome, which had fallen on land, was reborn on water. Venice became a Frankenstein version of ancient architecture, where each building carried a fragment of the past. And it was this mixture that created its unique beauty, half Roman, half aquatic, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Roman arches, symbols of power and perfection, were applied by the Venetians in the most practical way possible. They did not build them to glorify the gods, but to keep walls from collapsing. Every arched bridge was a geometric solution to the chaos of nature. Every support column, every curve, every stone was calculated to cope with the movement of the tides. Instead of fighting the water, Venice learned to live with it. When the water rose, they raised the foundations. When a canal clogged, they dug a new one. Thus, over centuries, the city not only stood firm but also flourished, proof that flexibility can be more sustainable than sheer strength. Amid these challenges, Venice began to find its identity. With no land to farm, they turned to the sea. With no fortress to defend, they made the water itself their front line. Unable to expand onto land, they expanded into the world. The very initial limitations forced Venice to become a maritime, commercial, and artistic empire, spreading across Europe like a wind carrying the scent of salt. But make no mistake, this city was never a product of peace. It was born from fear and stubbornness, sustained by engineering and adorned with dreams. Every stone in Venice is a reminder that humans can turn mud into treasure if they are persistent enough to drive millions of wooden stakes into the lagoon's floor. This city is not a divine miracle, but a human achievement. And when you stand on the Rialto Bridge looking down at the shimmering water, remember that beneath the surface lies not only the reflection of the sky, but a fossilized forest, where thousands of years ago, desperate people drove each stake with the belief that perhaps this place would endure. And they were right. Venice, the child of mud and will, still stands, a miracle built by human hands. Although Venice's foundation might make any modern engineer break into a sweat, what rose from it stands as proof of humanity's almost absurd boldness. From the 12th century onward, the city was no longer merely a technical marvel. It became an aesthetic declaration against collapse. Palatial structures rose from the water as if mocking both logic and physics. Marble, once used to sculpt the gods, was now stacked into walls, columns, and curling balconies reflecting in the water. When sunlight streamed through the canals, Venice did not merely shine, it blazed like a glittering dream in the mist. Yet behind this brilliance was an unbelievably crazy structure. The Venetians could not build in the conventional way, so they invented their own style, a mixture of pragmatism, flamboyance, and defiance. Early constructions from St. Mark's Basilica to the Doge's Palace are evidence of calculated daring. Stone columns were not driven directly into the ground, but placed on wooden planks, which themselves rested on thousands of waterlogged wooden piles. The entire system seemed more floating than standing, and somehow it worked. Medieval architects might not have fully understood fluid mechanics, but they understood one thing clearly. If you cannot defeat the water, learn to live with it. Thus, Venice became the first city in history to turn the tides into an ally. Buildings were designed to flex with the flow, to settle without breaking. Walls leaned slightly, arches curved not by mistake but by calculation. Every window frame, every balcony was a negotiation between humans and the sea. This was no longer construction, it was a dance, a symphony of engineering, art, and audacity. While much of Europe struggled to build on unstable ground, the Venetians perfected the art of building castles on waves. Even more astonishing was how they turned inconvenience into identity. With no land to expand, the city grew vertically, each new floor a statement. We are still here. Narrow alleys barely wide enough for two people, and every bridge a delicate negotiation between engineer and artist. A Venetian bridge was never just a crossing, it was a stage, a sculpture, a marble painting of human pride. The Venetians constantly reused and transformed everything. When space was insufficient, they built upwards. When light was lacking, they opened massive windglass reflecting the sunset on the water. When wind and salt began to erode, they did not dismantle. They simply added another layer of stone, as if the city donned armor whenever attacked by time. The result was Venice appearing as a living organism, constructed from thousands of years of layered history. But engineering did not stop at keeping the city afloat. The Venetians went further. They made it breathe. Canals were deliberately dredged to allow water circulation, washing away mud and preventing foul smells. The drainage system, though ancient, functioned according to the self-regulating principle of the tides. Each high tide was a natural cleansing cycle. In an era when much of Europe struggled with urban sanitation, Venice had reached a level of self-washing twice a day. This ingenuity made Venice a leading center of hydraulic engineering in the world. Engineers from across Europe came not only to admire its beauty, but to learn how to make water obey. The Venetians invented salt gates, temporary dams, and pioneering foundation reinforcement techniques. And all of this was accomplished by hand, with hammers, wood, and the belief that it will probably work. But this city was not built merely with materials, it was constructed with mentality. The Venetians understood they were living in a grand experiment, where any mistake could send the entire city sliding into the sea. Instead of fearing it, they turned it into a philosophy. Precariousness became a style. While other cities worshipped solidity, Venice celebrated flexibility. While other civilizations built walls, Venice opened canals. It is the only civilization in history where risk was not eliminated but artistically embraced. During the heyday of the Venetian Republic, this very spirit of defying nature while surviving became national pride. Nobles competed to invest in opulent palaces, not just to flaunt wealth, but to prove they could challenge Archimedes' laws. Carved balconies, jewel mosaic walls, Corinthian columns reflecting shimmering light on the Grand Canal, all served as a declaration. This is not just a city, it is a human-made miracle. Of course, no miracle lasts forever. Each generation of Venetians faced the same question their ancestors asked: how do we keep it from sinking? And the answer was always the same: we will patch it. When the foundation sank, they added piles. When the water rose, they raised floors. When the sea spilled in, they erected barriers. Venice was not preserved by permanence, but by continuous maintenance. It is a work of infinite care, yet it is precisely through this maintenance that Venice found its immortality. There is no moment when the city is complete. It is constantly being recreated, reinforced, cherished. Each century, it rises again from the water as proof that humans can live with nature without needing to conquer it. And so Venice is not merely a wonder of art or engineering. It is a testament to a rare philosophy in human history, that sustainability does not come from conquest, but from harmony. In a world full of constructions built to last forever, Venice survives because it embraces fragility. It floats, yet does not sink. It leans, yet does not fall. It endures, because from the very beginning, the Venetians understood that instability, if carefully managed, can become the strongest foundation for any civilization. However, that luxury was not merely for show. It was a form of subtle defense. When walls could not keep out enemies, Venice used splendor as a weapon. Every gilded arch and every massive fresco declared, "We do not need land to be an empire." Light reflecting on the water made the entire city seem to glow from within. Merchants traveling from east to west were mesmerized. They saw a city floating between reality and illusion, where even poverty reflected as opulence. But behind that beauty lay a cold truth. Venice survived through a fragile balance between pride and disaster. Venice in the 15th century was like a tightrope artist walking a line between historical towers and nature. A high tide, a plague, or a failed trade deal could collapse everything, and the miracle was it never fully collapsed. While Florence busied itself arguing over art and Rome wrestled with the popes, Venice, isolated between salt water and the suspicion of kingdoms, built an empire with goods, contracts, and stubbornness. Venetian merchants were warriors in velvet. They carried not swords but ledgers. They did not seize territory, they seized markets. Ships departed every morning, gliding through silver mist on the Grand Canal, carrying spices from India, silk from China, gold from Africa, and sometimes political secrets enough to shift the balance of power in Europe. Each chest of goods was a vote in the silent election for global dominance. Venice needed no large army, for it had a more formidable weapon: information. They knew who was buying what, who faced shortages, and who was about to go bankrupt. In a world measured by land, Venice proved that intelligence and organization could rise, if you dared enough to try. Venetian merchants traveled so far they could recount almost the entire world map from memory. They brought back stories from Constantinople, Alexandria, and distant towns along the Arabian coast where golden sands met blue seas. They carried cultural influences, architectural styles, and legends mixed in incense and sails. Thus, Venice was not just a marketplace for goods, it was a meeting point of imagination. Every street, every square was where East met West and merged. In St. Mark's Basilica, you can see Byzantine domes, Egyptian columns, and Roman mosaics, all blended into a whole that seemed to defy rules. But alongside wealth came darkness. Venice's riches were built not only on wood and stone, but also on the sweat of slaves, taxes, and diplomatic manipulation. Venetian merchants could smile while breaking a treaty as long as profit continued to flow. Gondoliers sang in the sunset. But behind that music were the sighs of laborers in the arsenal, where day and night echoed with hammers and resonating wood. The city was a full opera, magnificent, tragic, and with no silence in the background. At its peak, Venice was not only a commercial hub but also an intellectual center. Mathematicians and engineers calculated bridge construction, measured canal depths, and designed drainage systems more complex than anywhere else in Europe. Architects like Palladio created works so grand yet balanced that they seemed to defy gravity. They did not merely build houses, they created the illusion that the city was immortal. But Venice was never immortal. It only knew how to delay death. And it was precisely this ability to delay that made it great. When the sun set over the lagoon, you could hear the water murmuring beneath palace foundations, the sound of time gnawing at a masterpiece. But the Venetians were not afraid. They held feasts, they lit candles, they invited painters to depict the fragile existence of their city. Titian and Tintoretto did not only paint the Bible, they painted Venice itself, a city struggling with the very element that created it. Canvases full of light and movement were prayers in color sent to the sea, both nurturing mother and unconquerable foe. In the 15th century, Venice reached the pinnacle of a floating civilization. Nowhere else in the world could you buy spices from India, watch an opera, and debate Greek philosophy in the same afternoon. This city proved that human imagination could challenge even physics, and perhaps that was Venice's craziest engineering feat, the ability to make the impossible beautiful. But like all dreams, it came at a cost. Marble blocks began to crack, wooden piles rotted, and seawater rose year by year. Wealthy merchants built new floors, while commoners moved higher, living among leaning walls and damp floors. And thus a paradox was born. Venice, a symbol of refinement and skill, survived through age and the acceptance of impermanence. Every construction, every arch, was a negotiation between humans and nature, a contract signed in lime, salt water, and time. Today, when you stand on the Rialto Bridge and look down at the reflective waters, you do not see just Venice. You see centuries of pride, creativity, and stubbornness, all drifting slowly but never disappearing. Venice is never complete. It simply continues to exist, and perhaps that is what makes the city legendary. Not because it was built on water, but because it chose to believe that water could also support a dream. However, what truly makes Venice a wonder is not merely its ability to withstand nature, but the way it cooperates with nature, a strange compromise between pride and humility. While other cities tried to conquer land, Venice learned to understand water. Its engineers and sailors observed the tides, recorded every shift of wind and wave, and turned them into the city's own heartbeat. Every canal was not just a thoroughfare, but a lifeline, a complex circulatory system where every corner had to harmonize with the sea. Nothing in Venice is accidental. Every stone, every step is placed so the water can circulate without suffocating the city. Even Venice's beauty is an engineering calculation. The domes are not only for show, but to distribute weight, reducing pressure on weak foundations. The dark wooden piles driven deep into the mud do not rot because they are isolated from oxygen, forming a stable foundation for the shimmering world above. In the Arsenal shipyards, considered Europe's first assembly line, thousands of craftsmen worked in a rhythm like clockwork. They could build a warship in just a few days, a feat far beyond the capabilities of any contemporary nation. Each ship was not merely a vehicle, but an ambassador, a testament to Venice's early industrial power. They mastered every detail, bending wood with steam, mixing pitch to waterproof, and designing hulls to maximize wind power. This was where the concept of efficiency was born, centuries before the Industrial Revolution. The arsenal did not just build ships, it produced pride, literally. And like every city that knows how to tell a story, Venice spoke through images. The city's painters did not merely record landscapes, they captured its soul. Titian, Veronese, Tintoretto, they transformed light reflected on water into a language of emotion. In their paintings, you see not only magnificence in structures, but also time, the invisible enemy always lurking around the city. Venice became the protagonist in its own portrait, proud yet weary, beautiful yet fading. The brilliance of the Venetians lay in their refusal to hide decay. They adorned it, Crumbling walls became a backdrop for the afternoon light. Moss covered stones softened reflections on the water. In Venice, even ruin had aesthetics. Yet that splendor could not prevent global changes. As trade routes shifted toward the Atlantic, Venice gradually lost its position as the center of the world. Spain and Portugal opened a new maritime era, bringing gold and silver from the New World, treasures out of Venice's reach. But surprisingly, they did not panic. Venice chose to adapt. It transformed from a commercial empire into an artistic one. Nobles who once cared only for profit now patronized musicians, painters, and scientists. As political power slipped away, Venice invented a new kind of power, soft power, the power of allure. No longer ruling through goods, it ruled through dreams. And those dreams spread across Europe. People began to see Venice not just as a port city, but as an idea, a symbol of elegance, a civilization that knew how to dissolve into light. Visitors from England, France, Austria came for inspiration and left longing. Poet Byron once wrote that Venice was a dream turned to stone. He was not wrong. The city lives in paradox. The more it declines, the more beautiful it becomes. The weaker it is, the more enchanting. Perhaps that is why Venice never truly dies. It only changes form in human imagination. Yet beneath that romantic glow, decline continued. Saltwater gnawed at marble blocks, each flood season carrying away a fragment of the city's memory to the sea. But instead of resisting, the Venetians accepted. They learned to live with loss. They celebrated Carnival as a way to laugh at fate, wearing masks to forget time, dancing among palaces gradually tilting. Nowhere else in the world is impermanence celebrated with such elegance. In Venice, death is not an end, it is part of the performance. The strange truth is, this very fragility allowed Venice to endure. When more powerful empires fell, Venice survived, not by strength, but by adaptability. It was like a creature that could regenerate every century, preserving beauty despite changing form. Today, scientists, architects, and engineers continue that legacy, building the Meuse flood barriers, raising building foundations, and simulating tides with supercomputers. Yet ironically, the most modern solution remains the old Venetian philosophy: negotiate with nature, do not try to conquer it. As dusk falls and light reflects on the water, Venice still hovers between two realities: a physical city and a legend. Perhaps the craziest thing is not the engineering that built it, but the collective belief that a dream could float on water for hundreds of years. In a world constantly seeking control, Venice reminds us that sometimes the greatest thing humanity can do is know when to let go, allowing beauty to find its own way to survive. If Venice is a city that negotiated with the sea, then Alamut is a fortress that negotiated with human intellect. Amid an Islamic world divided by ambition and dogma, Hassani Sabah built an empire that required no army, no treasure, only one thing: faith forged into discipline. He did not construct a kingdom out of stone, but out of ideas. And those ideas, like the wooden piles beneath Venice, endured long after the walls had fallen. In that mist-shrouded mountain, every breath was calculated. Every word, every step, every glance carried ritual. To Hassan, silence was not an emptiness, it was a tool. He believed that before a person could wield a sword, they must learn to master their mind. Death, to him, was not terrifying. It was merely a point in the equation of faith. And when he said jump, they did not ask why, they only asked from what height. The outside world called them assassins addicted to opium and illusion, but the world inside Alamut knew better. They were the pure product of knowledge and discipline. Hassan turned faith into a weapon that no one could see, no one could destroy, an absolute belief in purpose. To him, power did not lie in the dagger, but in the hand that held it without trembling. And that is why every empire, from the Crusaders to the Abbasids, feared that name, because they could not measure the terror sown by intellect. Hassan's assassins never killed indiscriminately. Each death was a message, signed with precision. A vizier woke to find a dagger on his pillow. A powerful cleric suddenly vanished in the marketplace. All part of the symphony Hassan composed, where music was played with silence and fear. No army paraded, no cannon fired, no trumpet celebrated victory. Only a warning echoed in the memory of the survivors: we could have killed you, but today we did not. And thus, entire kingdoms trembled before people they rarely saw. Hassan's greatness did not come from cruelty, but from the ability to understand people better than anyone else. He knew that fear does not reside in the blade, but in the mind. A timely threat could topple an empire. A rumor could replace a whole army. Alamut became the first intelligence center in the world where information was treated like gold. While kings were busy building walls, Hassan built networks. And it was that network, invisible, patient, wise, that made him immortal in history. But that power, like all human magic, carried darkness. The more he trusted intellect, the more he distrusted emotion. He stripped from people all that was weak: love, compassion, joy. In the fortress of Alamut, everyone lived like a shadow. They did not sing, did not laugh, did not dream. They learned to face death as a strict teacher. That was the price of perfection, to shed one's humanity to become a symbol. And perhaps that was also Hassan's tragedy. He understood everything about power except how to forgive. Outside, the world continued to turn. The Crusades spilled blood, dynasties rose and fell, but in that cold stone fortress, time seemed imprisoned. Hassan never left Alamut for 3 decades, controlling an empire with paper, ink, and loyalty. When he died, his disciples buried him in silence. No monument, no funeral. For them, Hassan had never truly died. He simply merged into the concept he had created, the notion that intellect could be stronger than the sword. Centuries later, when Marco Polo traveled through Persia, he heard tales of assassins rewarded with paradise through illusion. The story spread to Europe, turning Hassan into the father of the hashish murderers. But that is how history always treats terrifying geniuses. They are not understood, they are mythologized. People could not accept that an empire could be built solely on will and faith, so they attached something easier to grasp: madness. But if madness means breaking free of convention, then Hassan was truly mad, and that is why he became immortal. Today, the ruins of Alamut are nothing but moss-covered stones, yet the question Hassan left behind still resonates. What is stronger, the sword or the idea? Empires have fallen, conquerors have turned to dust, but the concept of the Hashashin persists in every culture, in every story of power and belief. From nameless historical assassins to modern cinematic figures, the shadow of Alamut remains, thin, deep, and sharp as a hidden dagger in a sleeve. Venice taught us how to negotiate with nature. Hassani Sabah taught us how to negotiate with ourselves. One used stone and wood to resist water, the other used will to resist chaos. Both knew that victory was impossible, but perseverance, the elegance in failure, is what ensures they are never forgotten. Perhaps that is the truly insane technique, not to conquer the world, but to make the world remember you, even when you have vanished into the mist. By the early 13th century, the name Hashashin was no longer just a rumor. It had become a symbol, a living idea, a warning that in the darkness there were people who controlled the world through silence. While empires fought over territory with blood, Hassan and his descendants ruled with psychology. An empire without maps, without borders, only believers and those who feared. Their world was a tapestry woven from information, rumor, and fear. In Damascus, merely mentioning the name the old man on the mountain would immediately hush conversations. In Cairo, it was said that a man who once mocked Hassan found a dagger placed on his windowsill the next morning, polished, cold, and bloodless. Even in distant Venice, merchants whispered stories of an Eastern sect capable of killing a king with nothing but a promise. But behind that smoke of legend, Hassan's system was actually a fully functioning machine of thought. Each follower was carefully selected, trained for years in philosophy, religion, cryptography, and performance. They were not merely killers. They were actors, scholars, and sometimes philosophers on an absolute mission. In their world, morality was measured not by life, but by purpose. A life taken could save thousands. An act of violence, if placed correctly, could prevent war. The cold beauty of Hassan's philosophy lay in the purity of motive. He did not seek power to dominate, but to maintain balance. In a world ruled by greed and hatred, Alamut existed as a center of reason, an oasis in a desert of fanaticism. And for this reason, it became a threat to every dynasty. No ruler could feel secure knowing there was someone in the shadows who understood their mind better than they did themselves. Islamic dynasties and even the Crusader armies tried to destroy the Hashashin. But how do you strike what has no shape? They attacked the mountains, burned the fortress, yet ideas do not burn. The legend of Alamut spread further than ever, growing stronger each time it seemed erased. For Hassan understood the essence of power. It does not lie in control, but in making others believe you can control. The 13th century also brought another storm from the east, the Mongols. In that whirlwind of iron and blood, no fortress was safe. When Hulagu Khan's army advanced into Persia, they destroyed everything in their path. The Alamut fortress, nearly 2 centuries impregnable, finally fell. The sacred mountain was burned, the library destroyed, and Hassan's remaining followers were slaughtered or vanished into oblivion. But the death of Alamut was not the end. It was a transformation. From the ashes, the legend began to live its own life. Survivors carried the story of the old man on the mountain far and wide. Anatolia, Egypt, even Europe. In each land, the story was told differently. In some places, they were demons. In others, saints. But the common thread was admiration mixed with fear. For the Hashashin had accomplished what no army ever had. They carved fear into the human imagination. When the world entered the Renaissance, European scholars began rediscovering manuscripts from the East, and among them they found a word that made them shiver: assassin. From that point, Western language gained a concept describing crime while honoring precision and cold courage. And in a deeper sense, assassin was no longer just a killer. It was someone who acted for an ideal, even if that ideal could make the world tremble. This paradox is Hassan's legacy, cursed by the powerful yet respected by those who understood the power of ideas. In a world where empires fell due to ambition, he built an empire that existed only in human minds, and somehow it still lives today. For the Hashashin are not merely a story about killers in the dark, they are a story about how humans use fear to maintain peace, and how legend can become a weapon stronger than the sword. Consider this: a fortress vanished, a leader died, yet thousands of years later, the world still speaks of them. Every time we say assassin, we speak in Hassan's language. Every time we hear a story of a secret society controlling the world, it reflects Alamut. Those historical shadows still exist in popular culture, in stories, films, games, even in the way we understand belief and control. And perhaps that is Hassani Sabbah's ultimate victory. He needed no weapons, no territory, no heirs. He only needed to leave behind an idea strong enough to live in the human mind, an idea that faith, when forged by intellect, can make humans immortal. Now, if you stand atop the ruins of Alamut, looking out over the valley where mist blurs the horizon, you will feel something strange, as if the mountain is still whispering. Not about death, but about the endurance of thought. And in that wind, among the charred stones, you can hear Hassan's message echoing through time. The world belongs to those who dare to believe in what others deem impossible. As the smoke of Alamut cleared and the blackened towers became mere memories, the world thought the chapter of the Hashashin had closed. But in reality, that was only the prelude to a longer, more intricate story. The story of how a legend survives through time, rising above the very history that buried it. For the true power of Hassan ibn Sabbah did not lie in daggers or fortress walls, but in a concept that humans cannot kill: the idea. After Alamut fell, the survivors did not vanish. They blended into the cities of the Persian Empire, becoming merchants, scholars, and even officials in the courts of those who had once hunted them. No one knew who they were, and that was how they survived. The Hashashin were no longer a sect. They became a silent tradition, an intellectual legacy hidden beneath layers of culture, religion, and politics. Those trained at Alamut continued to sow Hassan's seeds of thought, that knowledge is the only power that cannot be stolen, and fear is the most potent political tool ever known. While Europe remained mired in witch hunts and the final crusades, these ideas quietly infiltrated books, manuscripts, and the teachings of Middle Eastern philosophers. They no longer bore the name Hashashin, but their spirit lived on, in skepticism toward authority, in philosophy about individual liberty, and in the belief that one person could shake an entire empire. Centuries later, when Western scholars translated ancient manuscripts, they discovered a strange paradox. While Europe viewed Hassan as a symbol of terror, Persian manuscripts portrayed him as a political thinker who had realized early on that maintaining order required understanding how humans fear. These ideas, though distorted by hundreds of years of propaganda, left traces in Renaissance philosophy. Some Italian thinkers read the records of the Old Man of the Mountain and began to ask, could fear be the foundation of power? One of them, Niccolo Machiavelli, answered that question with The Prince, and thus Hassan ibn Saba was reborn, not in the blade, but on the page. From then on, the legend of the Hashashin became a global cultural archetype. In the Middle East, they symbolized loyalty and intellect. In Europe, they embodied obsession, the invisible killer, without nationality, without motive, without fear. And in modern times, they became a reborn legend, reconstructed through films, novels, and video games. The world saw in them not merely assassins, but the first free individuals, rebels against all oppressive systems through faith in their own truth. The word assassin, born from the slur hashishin, transcended all borders. It seeped into every language, every culture, carrying a cold tone of destiny. Every time people say assassin, whether in news reports, novels, or games, they inadvertently repeat Hassan's legacy: fear transformed into art. In the 19th century, when the West began rediscovering the East, archaeologists and explorers returned once more to the mountains where Alamut had stood. They found little beyond some broken stones and charred pottery, but what stunned them was the feeling, the sense that this place had once witnessed a secret civilization where knowledge, faith, and violence merged into one. An English historian wrote, "They did not merely kill to instill fear, they killed to teach the world a lesson about the limits of power." And perhaps that is Hassan's true legacy. He understood that every empire, no matter how mighty, relied on a fragile illusion, the illusion that people trust and obey. A single rumor, a dagger, or even a shadow on the wall was enough to make the system tremble. He turned belief into a tool, turned fear into language, a language every civilization could understand. Today, looking back, we can see that the Hashashin were not a dark chapter of history, but a mirror reflecting humanity. We still live in the world Hassan predicted, where information is a weapon, words can kill, and fear remains the most effective form of control. From modern propaganda campaigns to cyber warfare, we are still repeating the formula he wrote more than 900 years ago. Yet, amid that darkness, there remains a glimmer of light. For among the daggers and conspiracies, Alamut was once a place where knowledge was revered. They believed understanding was the only path to escape ignorance and tyranny. Though their library was burned, that thought continued to burn in the hearts of those who dared to question the world around them. Hassan once said, "Nothing is eternal except the truth." And perhaps that is why his legend endures. Not because of assassinations, but because of the courage to challenge every definition of morality, power, and freedom. When night falls over the ruins of Alamut, people still say that if you listen long enough, you can hear whispers in the wind, not the sound of a dagger being drawn, but the voice of an idea that has never died. An idea that humans do not need a king to tell them what is right. And that is why, thousands of years later, even though Alamut has turned to dust, the Hashashins still live within us. On cold nights in the Pamir Highlands, when the wind howled through the mountain passes, the Silk Road was no longer a geographical concept. It was a living artery of the ancient world, where distant civilizations touched each other through cups of tea, morsels of bread, and shared flames. In a place where sand and ice coexisted, hospitality became a religion, and flavor became the only way to express where I come from and who I am. A meal on the Silk Road was not simply for survival, it was a ritual connecting wandering souls. A nomad might never have read a word, but when he roasted skewers of lamb over the fire, sprinkling them with precious salt and black pepper, he was recounting the history of his own people. Every recipe, every spice was an invisible parchment containing the map of collective memory. The Persians believed that cooking was a form of prayer. They washed their hands as if entering a temple and simmered meat in a copper pot as if performing a ritual. Each pinch of golden saffron, each dried rose petal sprinkled into rice carried sacred meaning, turning ordinary ingredients into miracles. Meanwhile, the Chinese viewed the hearth as a balance between yin and yang, between spicy and sweet, between hot and cold, a philosophy in which every dish was a miniature lesson in life. Yet, what made the Silk Road the greatest culinary wonder of the ancient world was not the individual dishes, but the way they met. At the caravanserais, enormous way stations where camels rested and merchants exchanged goods and news, flavors collided like miniature civilizations. The aroma of Arabic coffee mingled with the scent of Chinese jasmine tea. The smell of Persian roasted goat blended with steamed dumplings in bamboo baskets. Men in different clothes, speaking different languages, sat around a single stew. And in that moment, every empire, every religion, every boundary vanished. A Greek once recorded that at a resting station near Samarkand, he was served a golden porridge, actually Persian saffron rice. He described, I have never seen the sun shine so brightly on a table. For Westerners of that time, saffron was a miracle, and Persia was the land of that miracle. For the Persians, sharing saffron was sharing a piece of the soul. In the caravans, women were often the soul of the campfire. They knew how to make use of everything, a few beans, a bit of flour, some dried fruits, to create meals both comforting and reminiscent of home. Some ancient records even state that certain dishes existed only through the hands of women, because they required patience, precision, and love. In the desert, those hands did more than cook. They kept the travelers' memory of why they had to continue their journey alive. Whether you were an envoy from the Tang dynasty, a Persian merchant, or a Mongol mercenary, sitting around the fire, you would realize a simple truth. Food is the only language that needs no translation. A piece of bread, broken in half, a cup of tea passed hand to hand, it is a greeting, a pledge of peace, a way to say we are more alike than we think. In a world full of suspicion, a meal became a political act. The flavors of the Silk Road did more than nourish people, they reshaped the world. A handful of cinnamon could change the fate of an entire empire. A bag of black pepper could send thousands to sea, open new maritime routes, and ultimately lead to the world being redrawn by adventurers. It all began with something seemingly small, humans craving for new tastes. From these exchanges, world cuisine was rewritten. Persian pilaf became the foundation for Indian biryani. Rose-scented tea spread into China, evolving into dozens of variations. And in the West, pepper and cloves from India enriched Venice, a city built on water but thriving on the flavors of the land. Ships from the West arriving in the East carried not only gold and silver, but an insatiable longing for taste. The beautiful thing was that with every sip, every bite, ideas traveled too. Along with spices, people carried philosophy, religion, and art. A recipe could reveal more than a strategic map. It showed what a civilization thought about harmony, how it treated nature, and how humans found meaning in every grain of salt. Therefore, when we speak of the Silk Road, we are not merely speaking of commerce or geography. We are speaking of a civilization that could be eaten, drunk, smelled, and touched, where flavor was the thread connecting wandering souls. There, hospitality was law, bread was a symbol, and fire was where people became equal. And if there is one lesson left after thousands of years, it is this. Every idea, once sown through flavor, will never die. For humans may forget the names of kings, but they will always remember the taste of the food someone shared on a cold night. As night falls over the distant sand dunes and mountain ranges, the last fire on the Silk Road still flickers, warming not only the bodies, but also the souls of travelers. In the shimmering light, each face reflects simple yet profound joy. The smile of sharing bread, wide eyes tasting unfamiliar spices, the crisp laughter of strangers who have just met but have become temporary friends. Every meal, every grain of salt, every pinch of saffron or pepper carries its own story, like seeds sown into the hearts of people, giving rise to mutual understanding and empathy that transcends language and borders. Cuisine on the Silk Road did more than nourish the body. It nurtured knowledge and culture. Dishes passed from hand to hand were not merely recipes, but treasures of civilization. From the art of steeping tea, preparing meat, cooking rice, to the harmonious blending of spices, all reflected the philosophy, beliefs, and lifestyles of each people. Every dish was a message, every campfire feast a meeting of civilizations. And these encounters laid the foundation for the cultural exchanges that the world continues to inherit today. But the Silk Road was not just about food or spices. It was proof that once ideas are shared, they cannot be stopped. Just as spices traveled through caravanserais, camels, and merchants, ideas about trade, politics, religion, and art spread across the continent. A pinch of saffron, a bag of pepper, or a cup of tea could become the starting point for great changes, opening new routes, inspiring knowledge, or planting the seeds for new inventions and cultures. Today, when we look back at the Silk Road, we do not only see caravans and luxury goods, we see the connection of humanity, an ecosystem where food, flavor, and hospitality serve as bridges between civilizations. Though thousands of years have passed, that spirit remains alive. Every time we share a meal, exchange spices or recipes, we continue the legacy of those ancient travelers, reminding us that humans can never go further than their understanding and kindness allow. And perhaps the greatest message the Silk Road leaves us is this: in a vast and complex world, flavor is a universal language, a meal is a bridge, and ideas are seeds that never die. When the sun rises again over the dunes and mountain peaks, we realize that all that remains is life, sharing, and the story of how humans turned a difficult journey into a feast of civilization. As the sun rises over the northern horizon, its first light falls upon the Viking longhouses roofed with grass, glinting off barrels of meat and fish hanging on wooden racks, a reminder that survival in this frozen land has never been taken for granted. Cuisine in Scandinavia, though simple, is a symphony of intellect and the instinct for survival. From cod dangling in the wind, dried reindeer meat, to pickled turnips, everything is prepared to endure the harsh winters lasting months. Each method of preparation not only ensures nutrition, but also conveys the collective experience of an entire culture, where time and nature become allies rather than enemies. The harsh climate forced the Vikings to develop extraordinary preservation techniques. Meat and fish were smoked over slowly burning wood, creating a protective layer that both prevented decay and absorbed a distinctive aroma. Even rare summer vegetables were chopped, salted, and fermented, turning into pickles rich in probiotics and vitamins, sustaining the health of the community. Milk, a precious commodity, was fermented into thick, slightly sour yogurt, providing essential energy for freezing days. For the Vikings, each meal was a lesson in survival, where creativity combined with discipline, and every flavor told a story of geography, seasons, and imagination. Beyond preservation, the Vikings also turned food into a means of social and spiritual connection. The flickering fire in a grass-roofed hut was not just for cooking, it was the center of community life. As dried fish, meat, or reindeer hung on racks, smoke rising and mingling with laughter, song, and storytelling, it created a cultural ritual, a way for the Vikings to express bonding and mutual respect. These meals, though humble, formed the foundation of hospitality and the belief that sharing food was a way to sustain life and community. While the Vikings' survival techniques ensured that bodies, spirits, and communities endured the ice, the Silk Road remains a testament to another way humans connected through food and flavor. In the Central Asian deserts, bread, lentils, tea, coffee, and wine became nonverbal means of communication where ideas, trade, and culture were exchanged naturally. Even without understanding each other's languages, people understood that sharing food and drink was a sign of respect and goodwill. This is the subtle intersection. Whether in the icy north or the harsh eastern deserts, humans used food to shape society, connect, and survive. Caravans on the Silk Road and Viking families alike knew that food was life, but also knowledge and art. In the desert, a pinch of saffron or pepper did more than enhance flavor. It could lead to trade routes, changing the fate of empires. In the north, fermentation, smoking, and preservation created enduring techniques that allowed people to survive, migrate, and conquer new lands. In both cases, food is an expression of human intellect, the flavor of civilization. However, what made both civilizations great was not only technique or material, it was the ability to turn eating into ritual, turning meals into cultural and spiritual bridges. Persians shared bread and tea as a gesture of peace. Vikings shared dried fish, smoked meat, and yogurt as a gesture of survival. They understood that every dish carried empathy, trust, and hospitality, and that sharing food was sharing destiny, sowing hope for the future. On the Silk Road, meals turned travelers into temporary friends, and flavors became a universal language. In the Viking hut, food preservation techniques were a means to protect life and maintain community. Looking closer, one realizes that every civilization relies on meals to connect people, and these connections create history. A handful of pepper, a piece of dried fish, a loaf of bread, or a cup of tea could become the starting point for ideas, routes, and relationships spanning time. As the sun sets over both the Central Asian desert and the frozen lands of Scandinavia, smoke, the aroma of spices, and laughter persist. It is not merely the mark of food, but the mark of civilization and human intellect. Anyone sitting around the fire, whether in a caravanserai or a Viking hut, feels the same truth. Sharing food is sharing life, sowing culture, and allowing ideas to endure through time. And from these humble tables, great civilizations were born, survived, and intertwined. Bread, dried fish, yogurt, tea, coffee, wine, all are seeds of connection, creativity, and endurance, proving that the Silk Road and the frozen northern lands were not just places of trade and survival, but places where civilizations learned to nurture each other through flavor, hospitality, and intellect. As the North European winter sets in, light becomes fragile, yet the Vikings continue their silent chain of rituals. Barrels of smoked meat, dried fish, and cheese have become living treasures, ensuring the community's livelihood through the dark, frozen months. In the longhouse, smoke curls through the air, spreading the scent of slowly burning birchwood and smoked meat, like an invisible veil protecting the food from spoilage. Every beam, every corner bears witness to human patience and intellect as they turn natural elements into allies to sustain life. Smoking is not just a preservation technique, it is also an art and a ritual. Lamb, reindeer, or salmon are not only treated to extend shelf life, they are transformed into symbols of endurance, a way for the Vikings to honor nature and their attachment to the seasons. The smoke not only firms the meat, but also creates distinctive flavors, etching each meal into collective memory. Children grow up amidst these aromas. Warriors load smoked meat onto ships, and sailors carry the taste of home across icy oceans, connecting generations and lands through seemingly simple but profoundly knowledgeable dishes. Alongside smoking, fermentation becomes a quiet miracle. Milk, the most perishable of northern foods, is turned into thick, slightly sour yogurt that can last weeks in cool clay jars or animal skin bags. Vikings did not know about microorganisms, but they understood that bacteria were silent allies, transforming perishable food into long lasting nutrition. Each batch of yogurt, carefully stirred and naturally timed and temperature controlled, became skyr, a protein rich yogurt providing energy for long journeys. Warriors carried it on ships, not only to eat, but to maintain health and morale during extended voyages far from home. The same process applies to vegetables and fruits. Cabbage, onions, carrots, and wild greens were chopped, salted, and soaked in brine. This preserved summer flavors while creating nutrient rich food for when winter covered the land in snow. Vikings also dried berries, seeds, and herbs to retain flavor, vitamins, and the joy of the fleeting season. Every dish, whether fish or vegetables, embodies centuries of experience, the product of survival intelligence and meticulous observation of nature. In lands where summer lasts only a few weeks and winter dominates, time becomes the most precious asset. Vikings learned to make use of every sunny day, every cold gust, to preserve and prepare food. They organized everything meticulously. Dried fish hung along the fjords, smoked meat on racks, vegetables and cheese in barrels, all following the rhythm of nature. This is not merely survival. It is a combination of discipline, art, and quiet science, turning a harsh land into a place where people could live, share, and thrive. Smoke, salt, and fermentation not only protect food but also connect the community. In the Longhouse, meals are rituals where people gather, tell stories, and pass on knowledge of preservation techniques. Elders instruct children on how to hang fish, sprinkle salt, and maintain the smoking fire, turning each meal into a lesson in survival and collective wisdom. In the dense air of smoke and salt, the winter's stress seems to dissipate, giving way to tranquility, simple happiness, and community spirit. Viking preservation techniques, though seemingly simple, form the foundation of cultural and economic development. Dried and salted fish became export goods, traded for salt, grains, and even weapons. These fish from Norway, Iceland, and Greenland were transported to markets in England, France, and Byzantium, where they were regarded as the white gold of the Arctic. The patience and skill of the Vikings transformed available resources into global assets, an early lesson on how humans could exploit nature sustainably and wisely. Moreover, smoking, salting, and fermenting created the distinctive culinary identity of Scandinavia, unique yet deeply connected to nature. Smoke imparts flavor, salt preserves, and fermentation provides nutrition. Together, they form a unique culinary ecosystem where each dish is simultaneously a survival tool, an art form, and a spiritual ritual. The Vikings turned all these elements into a bridge between humans and nature, past and future, individual and community. Even today, when modern techniques have replaced much of the traditional methods, the Vikings' survival secrets leave a profound mark. They taught that in a harsh world, patience, observational intelligence, and the ability to harness nature can create miracles. Smoke, salt, and fermentation are not just methods, they are living images of civilization, symbols of how humans learn to adapt, create, and connect through food. And when looking out at the empty boats after the fishing season, the snow covered skies, and the cold wind drifting into the hut, the Vikings understood that survival is not luck, but an art. From dried fish, smoked meat, cheese, and yogurt, they learned to turn time, wind, brine, and smoke into allies, creating sustenance and enduring traditions. In every meal, every smoking ritual, every jar of yogurt lies the wisdom, experience, and pride of a northern civilization, where humans and nature merge, survive, and thrive amidst the harshest challenges. As winter in northern Europe reaches its peak, Viking households remain busy with the art of preserving and preparing food, for they understood that survival depended not only on acquiring sustenance, but also on maintaining it over time. Wooden barrels, clay jars, and pits dug beneath the floor became strategic tools, where every layer of salt, every wisp of smoke, and each drop of yogurt was calculated to maximize the longevity of food. In the dim light of winter, every movement in the storeroom symbolized survival intelligence. Fish arranged by size, meat layered with salt, and pickled vegetables neatly placed in carefully sealed clay jars. That seemingly quiet space was in fact alive with the silent rhythm of patience, the cadence of harmony with nature. But for the Vikings, preservation was not merely a technical act, it was ritual and philosophy. Fermented vegetables, with their natural lactic acid, became a valuable source of vitamins and minerals, protecting the community from scurvy and winter nutritional deficiencies. Each salted cabbage or pickled root demonstrated human skill and nuanced understanding of microorganisms, even if they did not call it science. The Vikings realized that by cooperating with nature, rather than fighting it, they could transform decay into vitality, turn sourness into flavor, and convert potential rot into nutrition. Salted fish, and cured meats were the silent warriors of the winter table. Sailors carried salted herring onto ships, knowing that the slight tang would stimulate the palate when meals became monotonous after weeks at sea. Smoked meat, tough but rich in protein, together with carefully preserved butter and cheese, ensured energy for long voyages and health for the community. Each container was a living treasure, a time capsule where summer and harvest were stored for the harsh winter. Without wooden barrels, without the voyages, and without distant settlements, the barrels themselves became invisible shields protecting Viking survival. Yet Viking life was not only survival, it was culture and ritual. When the fully stocked food barrels were opened, meals became opportunities for sharing, gathering, and honoring the effort invested. Long feasts beside flickering torches in the longhouse transformed preserved food into symbols of prosperity, where stories, laughter, and music mingled with the aroma of smoke, the scent of smoked meat, and the tang of fermented vegetables. Anyone entering the longhouse in winter could sense the warmth, safety, and hope interwoven in the dense atmosphere of flavors and history. Fermentation and preservation were also ways for Vikings to mark personal and local identity. Each family, each village developed their own microbial cultures for yogurt, cheese, and vegetables. Yogurt in one longhouse could taste entirely different from that in the neighboring home, influenced by air, soil, wood containers, and sometimes the hands of the maker. This was the art of transforming nature into culture, where each batch of yogurt, each barrel of pickled cabbage told a story of community, tradition, and adaptability. The Vikings called it life. Today, scientists recognize it as natural probiotics, but to the Vikings, it was simply the result of patience and respect for nature. The food storage space of the Longhouse was a miniature universe. Stacked barrels of meat, fish, and vegetables, clay jars, and storage pits created a sophisticated management system where small errors, a loose lid leaking brine, could signal the risk of famine. Through this meticulousness, each Viking generation acquired seasonal memory, knowing when to prepare, when to harvest, and when to celebrate. These rituals connected people with nature and with each other, turning preservation into ceremony and strategy for survival. The Vikings also knew how to derive joy from preservation. When harvests were plentiful or spoils returned, meals not only provided energy but also displayed abundance and victory over nature's challenges. Each dish, from salted herring, smoked meat, frozen butter, to crisp pickled vegetables, testified to their intelligence, patience, and culture. Feasts in the Longhouse, where people gathered to drink mead from fermented honey, listen to music, and tell stories, were spaces where life, spirit, and flavor converged, creating memory and identity for the community. Even in times of war or long voyages, these methods retained their value. Meat, fish, and vegetables carefully preserved helped warriors and sailors maintain energy, health, and morale. The combination of salt, smoke, fermentation, and storage became a complete food ecosystem where every element served survival, both practical and refined. Vikings did not eat merely to survive, they ate to remember, to honor effort, and to pass knowledge to the next generation. In every barrel of meat, jar of fermented vegetables, drop of yogurt, and cup of mead, the Vikings saw the power of nature and human intelligence working together. They transformed the fleeting summer and the long winter into a resilient rhythm, turning ordinary ingredients into sustenance, joy, and cultural identity. Through understanding, patience, and creativity, the Vikings not only survived in a harsh world, but thrived, leaving a lasting mark on Northern European culinary and cultural history. But the legacy of the Vikings does not stop at the flavors they left behind. It lives vividly in every detail of daily life, in the habits and survival knowledge they passed down to future generations. Every barrel of dried cod hanging in the sea wind, every jar of pickled cabbage in the cool storeroom was not just food. They were monuments to patience, intelligence, and adaptability. When winter arrived, blizzards covering the narrow fjords, the Vikings looked at their food stores as if reading a living map, where each wooden barrel and clay jar was a survival indicator. The safety they created was not magic, but the result of thorough knowledge of climate, seasons, and the natural reactions of food. In modern Scandinavia, this continuity is still evident. Northern European cuisine remains imbued with the philosophy of preservation and resilience. Restaurants in Oslo or Copenhagen still use salted fish, and fermented vegetables, not only for flavor but also to honor the art of ancient food preparation. Each dish serves as a reminder that millennia ago, the Vikings had discovered methods to maximize natural resources, turning them into sustenance that lasted through long, harsh winters. And this is not merely a matter of nutrition, it is a living cultural heritage where knowledge of preservation, fermentation, drying, and smoking is passed down, turning every meal into a bridge between past and present. Dried cod, once an important export commodity, is now a culinary symbol of Norway and Iceland. Each upright wooden rack facing the sea wind seems to tell the story of transatlantic voyages, where sailors relied on the endurance of dried fish, salted meat, and frozen butter. This food is not just sustenance, it is a testament to survival, evidence of the Vikings' intelligence in living off the land. In Iceland, dried cod served with butter remains a national dish, simple yet imbued with the adventurous spirit and resilience of their ancestors. Every bite is a story, every flavor a slice of time, allowing the eater to feel the skill and intellect of the Viking generations. Pickling and fermentation also remain an indispensable part of Northern European cuisine. The Swedish dish surströmming, a distinctive fermented herring, is a direct descendant of Viking salt barrels. Its pungent aroma and strong sour taste may surprise the uninitiated, but it tells the story of a civilization surviving through long winters. It is a reminder that sourness once meant survival and was both art, science, and philosophy condensed into a single dish. The Vikings turned lactic acid into an ally, using it to prolong the shelf life of vegetables, protect community health, and create a distinctive flavor that still echoes in modern cuisine. Wooden barrels, seemingly simple tools, were the Vikings' secret weapons. They help preserve meat, fish, dairy, and beverages while allowing food to be transported on long voyages, expanding trade, and sustaining life in harsh environments. The clever use of barrels and layers of salt, fat, wax, or clay demonstrates the application of natural intelligence in daily life, where every small detail held life or death significance. Today, barrels are still present in breweries, wineries, and even in artisanal food preservation, attesting to the Vikings' timeless influence. Moreover, the health and nutrition they provided far exceeded their era. Fermented cabbage, salted fish, yogurt, and smoked cheese not only allowed them to survive winter, but also supplied natural probiotics, minerals, and abundant protein, equivalent to what we now call superfoods. The skillful combination of salt, smoke, and fermentation turned their diet into a complete nutritional ecosystem where every natural element was maximized. This is proof that the Vikings, even without modern science, deeply understood physiology, microbiology, and the vitality of food. Viking cuisine also embodied creative genius and communal spirit. When harvests were abundant or spoils returned, meals provided not only calories, but also joy, connection, and cultural identity. Everything was valued: salted herring, smoked meat, frozen butter, and crisp pickled vegetables. Meals became rituals where stories, music, and laughter intertwined, transforming food into a means of community connection and memory creation. These rituals also ensured that Vikings passed down preservation knowledge and skills to the next generation, making sure survival knowledge was never lost. Finally, through harsh climates, long winters, and vast seas, the Vikings learned not to fight nature, but to harmonize with and utilize its laws. By drying fish, smoking meat, fermenting vegetables, and storing food in barrels, they not only survived, but thrived, creating a sustainable, nutritious, and flavorful cuisine. These principles, from selecting ingredients to applying salt, smoke, or fermentation, continue to profoundly influence modern Scandinavian cuisine, where their legacy is honored in every dish, every feast, and every story shared around the table. The Vikings, through skill, patience, and survival intelligence, taught us an important lesson. Food not only nourishes the body, but also sustains the spirit, culture, and existence of an entire community. And because of this, even as the world has changed, the smoke of the hearth, wooden barrels, and the sharp tang of pickled cabbage still resonate, reminding us that life, intelligence, and culture can endure across time.